Hi, I am Nitzan Bergman, the director of Aseret Global, and I'm so happy today, just before Yom Yerushalayim, in Yerushalayim, to have the founder of the Aseret movement, Rabbi Shalom Schwartz, straight from Yerushalayim. Shalom, Rav Shalom.
Shalom from Yerushalayim.
How are you today?
That's me.
Okay, great. Rav Shalom, tell us about the Aseret movement. What is the Aseret movement?
The Aseret movement. Well, it's perfect to be speaking about it on Yerushalayim. There is a question why the Torah, the Aseret that he brought, the Ten Commandments, were given to us in the desert. Wouldn't it have been better to be given in Yerushalayim, the
Well,
city of
they
unity?
had to give everyone's attention. There was nothing else to do.
Nothing else to do in the desert. Okay. Today, it's there's a lot to do in Yerushalayim today.
Yes.
Um, But the Aseret movement is really based on reconnecting the Jewish people to the consciousness and values of Sinai, the Mount Sinai, where we received the Ten Commandments through the framework of the shared values of the Ten Commandments. That to reconnect and unify the Jewish people to fulfill our mission that we received at Sinai through the shared core values of the Ten Commandments.
Hmm. Wow. Do you think most people, let's even take like religious people, or not necessarily, don't have that consciousness?
I think it's inherent in the experience of Sinai that it's planted in our souls. Like every state of consciousness, we lose track of them, right? Do we all have a state of consciousness of being aware of each other, the dignity of man, the being created in God's image? Do we all already have that? Yes and no. We all have it when we connect with our soul's perception of reality, and we don't have it when we're stuck in our egos, when we're distracted, when we're doing things without heightened consciousness. So it's that's the beauty of this, is it's not creating something new, it's really returning to who we truly are.
Hmm. Nice. Okay. Great. So we are promising people that this is the video cast that you got to listen to before Shavuot this year, Tafshin Pei Vav. Let's start with something that I know is very dear to you and something you've spent a lot of time and effort thinking about and getting into is this piece in the Talmud that says that it's the mountain is called Sinai is actually a nickname. The real name for the mountain is Chorev, but it's called Sinai or Sinai in Hebrew because Sina Yada Olam, hate came to the world. I know you made a film about it, Tragic Awakening. Um, I want to ask a very particular question, like what, since October the 7th and the the world war against the Jews, this incredible surge of anti-Semitism, how has that helped you understand this piece of Talmud?
I don't think I understood it all before October 7th. I think we experienced it in full force. At least those of us that were born after the Holocaust, we never experienced this level of Jew hatred. Um, so the meaning of Jew hatred was kind of an abstraction. I mean, I had a few incidents as a young man encountering anti-Semites, but they were it was never a palpable reality that I was living with. On the contrary, I had non-Jewish friends and I felt very safe growing up in Canada. And the realities that have changed since then make the question of why are we hated very real and very important to understand, not in an abstract way and not in a Talmudic analysis way, but in an ongoing, real way. Like, what does it mean? Why am I feeling that hatred? Why is it directed to the Jewish people, to Israel in particular? What is it there to teach me? If I believe in a God who created this world and created this world with a meaning to it, and the principles that operate in this world are God given and God in a sense, God managed even, right? God's involved in history. So the process of awakening to anti-Semitism in a world that I'm asking, what is God teaching me by this, is really what the Talmud is opening up the question of. If there's something that happened at Sinai that is still resonating in the world to the point where, as a Jew and as an Israeli Jew, I have people that want to wipe me off the face of the earth, what does that mean? And do I want to run away from that? Do I want to embrace that? How do I deal with it in a not just a how should I put it? Not an individual way either, but as a message for the whole Jewish people in the world, because it's something that is highly um, critical to understand if we're going to change this current reality that we're in.
So I don't know if this is a fair question, but I'm going to ask it. Could you what is it? Why? What is the meaning of this statement? And why do they hate us? I agree. I keep on pinching myself. Like, I really do think of myself as a nice guy. I haven't caused that much damage in the world, and I'm pretty nice. And I don't want to hurt anyone. I really don't. Don't hate people. Why do they hate me?
I think when we look at the world's, when we read the news and speak to people who are actually experiencing this in different ways in different places in the world, I actually was very deeply moved by a podcast that I heard of a Toronto Jew who did a research project across Canada to understand how the development of anti-Semitism is manifest. For the last 6 months, he researched it, and you can watch it. It's on Dan Senor's podcast. Trying to remember the name of it, but you can catch Dan Senor interviewing this fellow. His name is slipping my mind at the moment. Maybe it'll come to me. Nice fellow. Anyhow, he did this research. He's a journalist, and he pointed out that it's something that has erupted. When he described his friends that he had been in touch with and basically um, experienced a wave. He almost, he describes it as something that's like a genie out of the bottle, like something that you can't actually explain fully from a sociological or psychological standpoint, because the dimensions of it are so beyond, right? He talked about when the average person that he's in touch with, friends of his, when they embrace the so-called conspiracy theories about Jews, that Israel is this colonizing, genocidal, horrific nation, and that all Jews take part in that in some way, certainly the Zionist ones that support Israel. And he looked at this and he goes, like, you can't talk rationally to that. It just became something beyond a rational explanation and beyond rational dealing with. That doesn't mean that he doesn't deal with it. He's a journalist. He's exposing the lies. He's doing it all. But he said it's not going to go back to what it was. That's how he described his relationship with these people. I can't see being a Canadian Jew as I was before October 7th. Something is the genie's out of the bottle. This ruach, as we'd call it in Hebrew, this wave or energy of anti-Semitism is spread in such a way that the only thing it brings up for me is Nazi Germany, right? Nazi Germany, Jews were called vermin, and intelligent people were believing that Jews were subhuman and needed to be wiped off the face of the earth. So when you encounter this so-called irrationality of anti-Semitism, and you realize it doesn't fall into the normal categories that you're used to explaining sociologically, psychologically, religiously, even to try to explain it, it raises the question of, well, what actually is this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what the Talmud is saying, is something happened at Sinai that created what we call a kind of a, zulamat zu reaction, right? There's something about the dynamic of Sinai, which was the introduction of a moral code for humanity that the Jewish people were to be carriers of, right? So the Jewish people come to Sinai and they hear God speak. They're entrusted with That's just a message. They're entrusted with a mission. And
Mm.
that mission is to be the carriers of this sacred morality called the Ten Commandments, called the Torah. And the Jewish people then become, until now, the symbol of reminding humanity that there is a moral code that we're all responsible to. And that is an issue for those that don't want to listen to that moral code, as what happened on October 7th. Right? Hamas broke the entirety of the Ten Commandments. But when you look at it on a global scale, this has been the Jewish people's mission and its risk. When you represent a God-given morality in the world, you risk being viewed as a moral consciousness that people want to get rid of if they can't deal with that. So that is the dynamic here. And that's what the meaning of that explanation of the word Sinai, creating Sina, I understand it to be.
Yeah, by the way, I looked it up. It was with Jesse Brown. That's the guy that Dan interviewed. Interesting. Do you think how conscious do you think it is? Meaning, definitely the Jew hatred is conscious. They're exhibiting it. They're, buying it. But do you think they ask themselves this question? Like, hang on a second. Like, what's happening in me? In Cape Town, I had a friend who became the director of the Holocaust Museum in Cape Town. And I was talking to him about taking this job. He actually moved from being a school principal, a Jewish school principal, to the director of the Holocaust Museum. And he said a fascinating thing to me. I want to know your reaction to it. He said, he's speaking to a friend of his, a non-Jewish friend, about this job that he was taking. And he said, if the way a non-Jew has to think about anti-Semitism, the first thing is to acknowledge it. And I can't remember his reaction to that, but that's like such a puzzling and troubling statement.
Well, it reminds me of when Rowan Osman, who was the main spokesperson in our film, when she describes her process, she had this realization. She came to realize that she was an anti-Semite. She had a reaction, a visceral reaction of being in the same public space as Jews. And she asked herself, why do I have that? So, of course, being raised in Lebanon and having Hezbollah as her heroes, she understood that it came from her past, but she didn't basically acknowledge it. She didn't go around saying, yeah, I'm a Jew hater. It just when it came out in that context of having a panic attack, sharing space with Jews, she asked herself that question, what is this? So is it conscious? Definitely not on the level of that we think of conscious choices that we make. This is, in some ways, the power of the potential for change, as we see in people like Rowan and other great non-Jews who've stood up against anti-Semitism, is the minute that they recognize that this is a choice that they can make, that transforms everything. So
Mhm.
you see, choice is the most basic form of consciousness activated that we have in our lives, right? We know we can make choices, but so much of what we do is out of social conditioning, even brainwashing, media conditioning. We don't realize the extent to which our emotional reality and the choices we make are not really active, considered choices. So in that sense, it's unconscious. If you confronted a Nazi and say, do I look like vermin to you? What would he say? No, but you are. Like we can't really sort of cope with the level of dehumanization that happens in this process. So to think that Jews, it contradicts all of the history of the Middle East conflict, the colonization, right? We're colonizers. We're the most indigenous population that exists in the world. We've been here for thousands of years. We came back to our homeland. I mean, no matter how many facts you present to someone who's, accepted this worldview to change his view. So it's not that you can't confront it with facts, and you need to, but realize that it needs more than that. There needs to be some sort of And I call it a spiritual transformation, right? It's a spiritual element that's operating here in the sense that Sinai is a spiritual phenomenon. It's something that came into the world to transform humanity. It's got a moral force, it's got a resonance. The Jewish people are to carry this vision for humanity, which is a vision of peace. It's a vision of common moral code that can change humanity. But the extent to which we don't live with that, there's a spiritual force that says the Jewish people are not meant to assimilate. They're also not meant to be at odds with each other. When disunity happens to the Jewish people, it tends to create a vulnerability that is exposed by anti-Semitism, or it results in even anti-Semitism. So these are spiritual forces at work. Of course, the psychological dimensions are part of the puzzle. The attack of the as he was saying, the Canadians feel guilty about their own colonizing of the indigenous native Canadians, the Indians, and destroying them, but they can't quite cope with their own how to do tshuva, how to actually rectify that. So an easy target is Israel. Call them the colonizers and take out your emotional trauma and lack of resolution of your own guilt by seeing the scapegoat. And this is not a new phenomenon. There is a scapegoat throughout history, but that doesn't explain what the root cause is. It just explains the specific manifestation of it in a particular point in time. Even the concept of it being a virus. Yes, it spreads like a virus. So it truly is a virus. But what's the cause of the virus? That has to do with us representing this moral force for humanity in what we are meant to be. It doesn't mean that we're living up to that. By the way, people get this confusion. Jews are not living yet with the moral standards that the Ten Commandments lay out for us. So why would we hate it for that? Because it represents that spiritual force that we do carry. And we get glimpses of it as a people of our own potential. And historically, we've made an enormous impact on the moral development of humanity through the Torah and through other indirect means. But in the end, it has to do with this dynamic. And the dynamic is really what we're facing now on Shavuot, because the holiday of Shavuot is coming up. It's a chance to actually engage this power of Shavuot for transformation.
Shalom, before we get there, just want to stop on something you said about choice being a manifestation of consciousness, and a higher consciousness, the ability to notice oneself behaving in a certain way, or even having opinions, looking at the world in a certain way, and realizing that you, as a human being, are able to choose differently, are able to analyze that, think about that, and say, that's actually wrong. I'm behaving wrongly. I'm thinking wrongly. I could, and I want to, and I'm going to change. Right? I'm going to, that being an exercise, a manifestation, a exercise in consciousness is just I'm just loving that idea. Fantastic idea. And I think it fits in so nicely, because if Sinai brought into this world that very idea, so then, I'm sure you're going to speak about this more, about, as you said, the Jewish people, we carry that. And then the force against that, which obviously we have ourselves, right? We have, and so we can get into that, but this non-Jewish, the non-Jewish force against it, which is appearing now as anti-Semitism, demands that sort of choice. It demands, it's a calling to, their Sinai moment would be what you explained, like Rawan went through, acknowledging the anti-Semitism and then making that choice and say, no, I'm actually going to be bigger than that. I'm rising up. I like that idea a lot. I think that's a bit of a breakthrough thought, actually.
I'll just say I don't think that Sinai was the, we were the creation itself describes man being created in God's image. God's image implies, of course, free choice. That's what the Rambam says. The basic, just as God is free to choose, so too he gave in creation itself was for the purpose of having a being that had the freedom of choice between good and evil, between truth and falsehood. So that dimension was brought in. Sinai was actually a complicated process of that because God got to the point where he said, okay, um, we have some problems with human beings making the right choices. And the ups and downs of that you can read about in the Bible, but at a certain point in history, God says, okay, we're going to have a people that actually are going to carry this, even if they don't want to. In other words, the whole question of at Sinai, did we make a choice? So there's an ambivalence in the report of the rabbis of what took place there. On the one hand, we said Na'aseh v'nishma, we accepted the covenant, and that was key. And the free choice that we made as a people is the underpinning of our commitment to the mission. At the same time, it describes that the revelation of God was so powerful, it was as if our choice was taken away from us. It said, all the midrashim that say, if you don't accept that this is going to be your burial place, but the basic understanding is that when you're confronted with truth, there's a level of diminishing of the possibility of choosing evil, which in the end of it, it's for our good. In other words, we want to be in a place where we choose to live with what we want, even when we resist it, even when we struggle with it. So when we talk about, there's a position in Chassidut that the highest level of free choice is to give up your free choice, to want only to follow what's true and right in God's will. And there's a lot of power to that idea because in the end, we're trying to live with what we can align ourselves with the highest truths in reality. But to choose to give up your free choice is still a choice. To choose to align your choice with God's will, your will with God's will, is a very challenging but crucial point that is of the essence of the experience of Shavuot. We're getting back to Shavuot. That is really what we're shooting for on Shavuot. To stand again as a Jewish cycle, the concept of the Jewish year is that the energy of each of the holidays returns annually, and the opportunity to have what we call Matan Torah, to receive the Torah, Kabbalat Torah, the gift of Torah, on Shavuot is available in ways that it's not available as easily the rest of the year. And so when we come to Shavuot with a recognition that I'm now choosing to align my will with God's will, to align my desires with God's desires, and to experience that is really a very powerful holiday experience of Shavuot.
Okay, I want to hear more about that. I do. I as we speak about go into Shavuot, something I think is pretty novel, actually. This idea that I've heard from you many times before is that, well, if Sinai is the problem, it's also the solution. And the solution lies there. Tell me more about what does that mean? What do you mean by that? And really, like, if we can, to get quite practical, because how do we go about doing it?
Okay, so let's start with one of the fundamentals in that regard. Look, if disunity is the cause, also the forerunner of, or the having the Purim story, right? In Purim story, Haman describes the Jewish people as mifarad, mifuzar, we're spread out, we're disconnected, we're at odds with each other. Mifarad means like, what's the word for English? You're like a dis, discordant. Is that the right word?
A
We're
lot of
not
this world, yeah.
together. We're disunified, And that state of disunity, Haman saw as an opportunity in the sense that the Jewish people were vulnerable. And the immediate response of Esther and Mordechai is Hakelit kol Yehudim. We have to come together. We have to respond to this. I mean, that was the decree. That was that they're going to wipe out all the Jewish people on Purim. The immediate response is unify. We have to be together. So if the cause is disunity, in that sense of our disconnection from each other, because in order to fulfill our mission that we got at Sinai, we need to be ki'ish echad b'lev echad, the same state that we received it in. So the Sinai experience, which was characterized by this unity of the Jewish people, the cause of the anti-Semitism and the cause of the Sina that's coming into us is to remind us that we're one people, because the anti-Semite doesn't differentiate between the religious or the non-religious or the diaspora Jew or the Israeli Jew. So it's coming to remind us of our oneness that is actually inherent in our state of a nationhood. We are like one entity. It's called Knesset Yisrael. We actually have this inherent oneness, inherent unity as a people. And therefore, the answer to that hatred is to unify, to treat each other as one people, as one nation, become much more committed to our common destiny, to our shared values, to seeing each other as part of the one family. So the response to anti-Semitism on that level, the same way we experienced it, at least here in Israel, and I think around the world, on October 7th, October 8th, we had gone from tremendous conflict, inner conflict, especially here in Israel, of the right and the left and the judicial reform. All these things created a sense of massive inner conflict. October 7th happened, and immediately the response was unity. We're going to unify against our enemy, but it's not there to only be unity against our enemy, it's to unify us in our identity as Jews. We're one nation with one family. We have each other's backs. Religious and non-religious are fighting in the same units. We are there together for each other. That commitment to each other, that loving of each other, that sense of feeling that all those barriers that we experience were actually just superficial, and on the deeper level, we are one soul with one mission. That is an answer to anti-Semitism. According to the Talmud, and if you're looking through the Bible, you see this history of when we're disunified, when we're in conflict, we get attacked from the outside. So if we can actually respond by being committed to each other, see the divine spark in all of us, I'm talking now internally to the Jewish people, but not only. Ultimately, it gives us the power to be a model society for the brotherhood of man, which is our mission. But as a essential starting point, we need to be unified as a people. And it's not a slogan. To make it into an actual remedy or trufa, how do you say trufa? Like
Healing.
a healing for this problem of anti-Semitism, it has to be very, very real on a grassroots level, so that when you see another Jew, you say hi to them. They're your family. When you experience that sense of these are all my brothers and sisters, we can have very different opinions and we can have very different ways of life, even, but on the basic level, on the soul level, we're one people. So Shavuot is an opportunity to recommit to that, to have conversations with Jews who are different from you in a way that you respect them on the level of your family. A family that's dysfunctional doesn't get rid of a child. A family that understands the unity and loyalty and commitment of family can accept differences, can learn from those differences, can see them as complementary. So Shavuot is an opportunity for an individual and communities to do something about that. There's communities that stay up all night learning. So you can go to a different shul that you don't normally go to, speak to people who have different views of yours. You can invite Jews that have different views than your own to have a meal together, to speak to them. Unifying Jewish people on Shavuot is not what's the word? It's not just sideline. It's not a side thing. It's something core to the experience of Shavuot. And therefore, I would recommend thinking about practical ways to implement that in your community as an individual to talk to people. You know, I had this experience in on Yom Kippur in Tel Aviv. I decided to go to to Tel Aviv on Yom Kippur this just before the hostages were released last year on Hoshana Rabbah, and the year before that there was massive conflicts in Tel Aviv on Yom Kippur. And I decided I'm going to go to Yom Kippur and pray in what's called Hostage Square. And it was a very moving experience. It's a long story, but there was a potential division between people that wanted seating in one way and people seated another. There were two women who were both mothers of hostages who got up and together solved this problem, demonstrated real unity of one was religious, one was not, but they took this on and they solved it. And then later that night, I was sitting there in the hostage square and I saw these two secular Jews sitting there. They had come a little later, and I decided, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. This is Yom Kippur. It's a time of reconciling. And I went over and I had this hour-long conversation with them that opened with, who are you? Who are you? What are your views? You know, just listening to each other, what they call sacred listening, you know, listening with respect that this is another person created in the divine image. He's my brother. And we had this amazing connection on Yom Kippur because the spiritual reality of Yom Kippur is that which, you know, takes away these differences. We're much more soul conscious and much more able to speak from a position of respect of the other person's divine image because we're connected to our own, which is, of course, a key factor here. For a person who doesn't feel his own divine image, it's very hard for him to respect and see another person's. Always, so when you want to speak to another person's divine image, first feel your own and speak from that place.
Uh, um, Two things. One is my own commentary, and then I want to ask you what I think is such a hard question. What you mentioned before about choice and about how everyone has choice. It's a human part of the human gift. Um, I'm very much a meter connected meter guy, meaning measure for measure. God runs this world in a very logical, straight way. It's like measure for measure. The way you are is the way you're treated. And listening to you, I'm like thinking about how, you know, is this a rational explanation about how anti-Semitism could be solved? It's well, if the Jewish people got together and became one, anti-Semitism would dissipate, disappear. That's why. Or so I think measure for measure, you know what it means for the Jewish people to get together, exactly like you said, is to make a choice. I don't like the guy. He's different. He rubs me the wrong way. He's got political views which I think are crazy. I don't want him. I like close my ranks. I don't want anything to do with him. And to make a decision to go above that, to say, hang on a second, this is my brother. This is my sister. I'm going to encounter them. I'm going to embrace them. I don't have to agree with them. I don't, but acknowledge my own aversion, initial energy, and go above that. That will stimulate. That's the meter connected meter here. That then the non-Jewish world is like, okay, we can go above this. That's not hard. Look, they did it. So I always try to find that connection. I don't know if you like it or don't like it.
No, I think what you're saying is very powerful. I want to emphasize or just add to that a little bit that there's something about um, connecting with another human being that brings God's presence into that relationship. Right? We know that that's basic in marriage. By the way, I learned something today about that Shavuot is actually referred to as Shabbat Kala. It's a sefer by uh, I'm forgetting now, but it's the there's Shabbat Kala means a Shabbat of a bride,
Hmm.
because according to many of our understandings of Shavuot, it's a wedding. The Jewish people receive the Torah as an expression of the wedding present of actually the Luchot Habrit, that the the tablets were like a ketubah. They represented the kiddushin, the wedding of the Jewish people with Hashem. We know that a wedding, a marriage, for it to be successful, has to have a spiritual bond that is basically God's presence in that relationship. For it to have long-term continuity, you have to respect each other's divine image. You have to bring God's presence and morality into the relationship. So too, the Jewish people, for us to carry out our mission, it's actually a contradiction and inherently contradictory to think that we can be the carriers of God's light, if we are not at one with each other. If I hate my brother, what kind of light can I hold on to be a carrier of God's light in the world? They're mutually exclusive. I have to build the vessel for receiving God's light, which is basically to love my brother as myself and my sisters, and to be able to have that sense of unity and commitment and love as the foundation of our peoplehood, which is what Shavuot required at that time. That's why it says, Ki yishechad v'lev echad. We had to have that unity at Mount Sinai in order to receive the Torah, but not as a one-time thing, but as the vessel that can hold the light that we need to bring as central to our mission.
Well, yeah, it looks like Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, he quotes that in times before this was called Shabbat Kala, Shavuot, and he compares it to, like, the I think the Shabbat before Shavuot, right? Not Shavuot
Yeah,
itself. The Shabbat
you're
before.
right. Pardon me. The Shabbat, this coming Shabbat,
Yeah,
is referred to as
yeah.
Shabbat Kala.
Just like Shabbos Shuvah is the one before Rosh Hashanah. Shabbos Gadol is the one before Pesach. Shabbat Kala is the one before. Beautiful. Um, okay. Um, so it appears to me, and maybe I'm wrong, you can tell me, that the kind of two camps. There are two camps where, and that's the beginning of the problem. There's the unity camp. There's people like you and me who are like, hey, like, don't you see it? Don't you get it? We need to unify. We need to embrace. I'm open. You're open. We try our best. And then there's a disunity camp where I find some people, maybe a lot of people, are, digging their heels in and saying, yeah, there is conflict, but we're right, and we have a goal, and we have our ideas, and we see it politically on the right and the left. We see it religiously on the extremes of, extreme religious and extreme non-religious. Um, and I don't know, in terms of numbers, there's uh, definitely always the silent majority in the middle don't make as much noise. It's much easier. You screech when you dig your heels in. You don't screech so much when you're okay with everyone. How do we deal with that? How do we get the extremes to put down their guard a little, to be open, to embrace this message?
What comes to mind is that it requires a lot of courage. Moral courage is not just standing up against your enemies. It's about entering into uncomfortable conversations and dealing with uncomfortable situations where you're trying to find a way out of a conflict, or managing the conflict, or navigating the conflict. I think of, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who talked about two of his children that had gone very far away from his religious family, and he simply he was sitting Shiva for his mother, and he was talking about how loving his mother was, and how his love that he got from his mother enabled him to constantly love those that went away. It's children. He needed to stretch. He said, some people go to their children in that situation, don't come in. You have different views. You're going to affect the family. And he was saying it's such a tragedy. It's their family. And he was praising his mother of having given him this sense of unconditional love. So there's something about unconditional love in a family that has to transcend the differences that we have. Now, in the Aseret movement, the strategy that we do, and we've seen it work, is that we have shared goals and we have shared values, even with our people that we have major disagreements with. In order to get to the feeling of connection, we have to stress the former. We have to see them in a positive light. We have to see what good we see in the others that are different from us. We have to use that as the bridge to communicate and reveal the shared values and the shared goals, and to have that as the foundation of the relationship. Then we can deal with where we differ. We're not ignoring the differences, but we're dealing with them in the context of a shared hopes, shared values, shared mission. And that's what the Aseret Dibrot offer us. The Ten Commandments were given in some ways for that purpose. They're the foundational core values that are imprinted on the souls of every Jew and ultimately provide a moral code for all of humanity that we can all agree on. Look, President Trump just called for this global Shabbat, this coming Shabbat. There's something about recognizing universal values as the basis for solving these extreme disagreements. It doesn't happen overnight, but when you can feel we have enough to agree on, to start rebuilding our relationship, not based on hate and distance, but on warmth and connection, then we can move forward. And we're desperately in need of moral courage to do that, to go out and seek out those people and have an Aseret group that discusses the shared values that we have, even though we disagree on a lot of the applications and a lot of political views and religious views, even on the whole issue of Sinai. Did it happen? Didn't it happen? What is it? Okay, we disagree with that. Can we see that these values are shared, that we actually can unite around them? And I've seen it work. We've seen that when people do take some humility on all sides, it takes some listening on all sides, but there's a softening that can happen when you're sharing shared values. There's a softening can happen when you realize you have a shared destiny. And at that moment, the bridge is beginning to get built. The healing is beginning to happen. And then it needs to be built on common activities. When you find an activity that you actually have a shared value, chesed. We all believe in doing kindness. We believe in praying for injured soldiers and helping families that have lost loved ones. So we should unite and use our shared our differences to complement each other once we find shared values to reunite around. And that's the message of this week's Parsha. Actually, in Parshas Bamidbar, we see an interesting phenomenon where on the one hand, we know Jewish people are unity, and then we have these 12 different tribes, and each one had its own flag. And this week's Parsha speaks about the different flags. So the answer is there was the Mishkan in the center of the camp, that which unified us, which was God's presence and our sense of, oh, we're all carrying this name of God. But then there's 12 different groups with 12 different abilities and focus and really ability to contribute differently. And that's what happens next. When you realize you have a shared set of values, then you can appreciate the differences in a way that doesn't threaten division, because you know you're united, but you're going to take that task and I'm going to do this task. And this guy's a businessman, he does that well. And these guys are in high tech and these guys are leaders of this and there's political leaders. There's 12 different dimensions of a society that the Parsha describes, how each of these 12 tribes had significantly different contributions to make. So it was pointed out that we didn't get these flags as soon as we left Egypt, right? We only got them a year and a month into the process. Why? Because we had to feel that unity first and build the Mishkan and have the shared values. And then everything else is about you play this instrument, you play that instrument, and we're going to have a common symphony, but only after we know that we really share the same values and mission.
Wow. Now, it brings to mind the Alta of Kelm said very deep psychological insight is that we tend to notice and remember that which stands out. And the truth is, superficially, what stands out is differences, right? I meet you, you're like, oh, but I think we're at the stage now where our common, these common values that we really do share is such an aha moment. That really stands out. Like, what do you mean? That guy, he thinks like me. Like, what? He wants the same world. He's really like, aha. Like, oh, we have an aha moment to experience Klal Yisrael. So yeah, that can add to the idea of the avodah, the work of Shavuot, the experience of Shavuot, the opportunity is to have that aha moment. Wow, you know, we really are deep down so aligned, so much want the same thing. And Rav Shalom, you're dressed in your white shirt, very nice. I know why. For Yerushalayim, Yom Yerushalayim. Let's touch on that. Let's end with that. What does Yom Yerushalayim mean to you? How does that fit into all of this? What blessing do you have for everyone in Yom Yerushalayim?
You'll permit me to tell a story that happened to me many years ago. I was in a taxi cab, and it was during a very heavy time of terrorism, and I was driving in the taxi just beside the Kotel, beside the Western Wall, and I said to the taxi driver, we could really use some miracles right now. We should be praying that God should. And he looks at me and he said, whenever I go by the Kotel, I know that there's miracles that can happen. I'm fully aware of the miracles that can happen. I said, what do you mean? He said, I know miracles happen. I said, what do you mean? He said, do you want to know? I said, yes, I do. So he said that in 1967, in the end of May, there was the Arab world was calling for Israel's destruction, and literally saying we're going to throw the Jews into the sea. And he brings me back to at that time he was a soldier in the Israeli army during that 1967, the end of May. And he said he went to visit his father, who lived in a small apartment near Machane Yehuda, if you know that area. And he saw that his father was depressed. And he said to himself, what are you depressed about? He said, I think this might be the end. The 19 years of the state of Israel might be coming to an end. And his son looked at him and he said, Abba, al tidak, don't worry. Shavua haba nikach otcha lakotel. Next week, I'm going to take you to the Western Wall. And he tells me this story. He said, you realize that was an impossible statement to make because it was under Jordanian control. We couldn't go to the Western Wall at that time. But it came out of my mouth. I simply said to him, I'm going to take you to the Kotel. And he said at that moment, he then left the apartment. And a few days later, the war broke out. And sure enough, he was driving an army jeep in Hebron exactly a week later. And as we know, the first few days of the war, first few hours of the war, the Israeli Air Force destroyed the Egyptian Air Force, the Syrian Air Force, and there was the third day of the war, if I'm not mistaken, Jerusalem was taken reunited, and the Western Wall was in our hands. Har Habayit biyadenu. So this fellow said to me, you remember this story? I said, I was only 12 years old at that time, but he said I was a soldier, and he was in Hebron at that moment, and he remembered that he made this promise to his father, that I'm going to take you to the Kotel. And he said to his fellow soldiers on the jeep, in the jeep, you have to get out. What do you mean get out? It's a war going on. He said, no, I'm sorry, I got to go do a mitzvah. I'll be back. By the way, he wasn't a kippah wearing Jew, this fellow. He was a so-called traditional Jew. And he drove to Jerusalem, went to his father's apartment, found his father going out to go to shul. At that moment, he said, "Get in the car." To shorten the story, he brought him to the kotel. His father collapsed into the kotel and hugged the kotel. The civilians weren't going in there. He managed to get him through and he spent the whole night hugging the kotel, this father of this young man. And he looked at me and he said, he then had to rush back to Hebron, but his father, from that day on until the day that he died, in recognition of this miracle of the Jewish people going from fearing of being completely wiped off the face of the earth to not only being saved, but saved with the returning of our homeland of Jerusalem, our holy city of Jerusalem, he said that he walked every day to the kotel from his home to pray in Mincha in the afternoon. And then he looked at me and he said, "Look at that. A Jew makes a promise to his father, has to keep his promise to his father, right? Honoring your parents. And Hashem completely turned the world upside down so I could fulfill this promise to my father." And he laughed. But it's so symbolic, that story. There's so much there. It's the miracle. It were promises to our fathers. We came back to Jerusalem because we have a promise from our fathers and to our forefathers that we're going to fulfill this mission that began at Sinai. And Jerusalem and the temple represent the fulfillment of that, taking on that role again to be a light to humanity. That's what we celebrate on Yom Yerushalayim. We're celebrating this opportunity to fulfill our mission that we got at Sinai. We're supposed to be a temple that all the world is going to come and ask to teach them morality, teach them God's Torah, teach them about God, about a relationship with God, that awareness that we share this brotherhood of man. That's all symbolized, and not just symbolized, it's inherent in how we want to use the temple, God willing, it'll be rebuilt at the right time, soon in our days. So Yom Yerushalayim is a tremendous opportunity to be grateful to God's miracles, to reconnect with our mission, and to realize that Jerusalem is really the epitome of Jewish unity. It's that which represents our coming together. It's in the tribe of Binyamin's land, but it had to belong to all. It was bought. The Temple Mount was bought with money from all the tribes. Everybody had the same chelik, same connection, same part in what the temple represents. So Yom Yerushalayim is an opportunity to realize that not only do we have a common history and common experience of miracles, but we share a common mission and destiny. And we should use the opportunity to pray that Hashem should guide us to fulfill that and to feel unified in it.
Amen. Amen. You know, I often think a forgotten aspect of the temple and what we're hoping will be rebuilt is the centerpiece. The whole centerpiece of the temple in the Holy of Holies is this ark. And what's in the ark? The tablets. It's that's it. That's the centerpiece. And they called in Hebrew luchot. And the chambers of the heart are also called luchot. And I think that's again mida keneged mida. If we can get these tablets to relate to each other and to go beyond the natural or the base nature of life and elevate and to be that living Tselem Elokim, image of God here on earth, all these things will go back to Yerushalayim. The tablets will be there. The non-Jewish world will give up on their anti-Semitism. You know, in fact, they'll like support us and laud us. We'll be that light unto the nations that we really can be. So it's not a small vision. It's a beautiful, big, audacious vision. And just want to thank you. Thank you for once again sharing your wisdom, and your heart, your open heart to this, to who we are and what we need to do. Have a beautiful. You got your flag at the back. Don't forget to take it.
I want to have another last word, if you'll let me.
Sure.
You know, we are sitting on the potential explosion of our war here again. I ask everyone to pray together for the, as we say in Hebrew, biyachad ninatzeach. We're fighting a war against evil. This is not, these are not slogans about morality. These are fighting for defeat of evil and to unite in that fight. So these are two important words. We say it all over the country. Biyachad ninatzeach. We need unity, linatzeach, to win, to defeat the enemies. Both these components, as every soldier will tell you, those are the elements of our daily lives here. We need to unite and we need to win this war. So we pray that well, together we understand what's at stake and our moral commitment to defeat the evil that is threatening not only the Jewish people in Israel, but the whole world. And we need unity for that, and we need resolve to defeat that evil with the moral clarity of Sinai.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.